it is correct.
Okay. So I'm going to start with a very basic questions. Very basic questions, sorry, related to the experiences in language learning and identity of retorno students in the BA program, which you are a professor. So what can we understand by, or how can we describe those experiences related to language learning and identity, which is very important, I believe, of return students? Or what can we tell us? Can you tell us about?
Yes, of course. Well, before I start, thank you very much, Professor Fernando, for your invitation, your very warm invitation to share this research with your students and with your context. And I think that we should do this more frequently, between universities and different contexts to understand, each other's places of origin and type of research, etc. So I think this is a wonderful initiative.
Thank you. Especially when we obviously we are part of Mexico.
Yes.
But Mexico is divided in many different parts, and obviously the context of Western the Pacific is very different from the context of the border, right?
Yes, exactly. So going back to your question, I think that I need to give some context.
Please.
Yes, because it's very different, the phenomenon of migration and return migration from this point of view, from this perspective close to the border. So those of you that have never traveled to Baja California, it is at least 117 kilometers from the Tijuana-San Diego border. Tijuana and San Diego they're separated just by a thin line. And Ensenada is a little bit further south, but it has a lot of interaction. So being this close, and this border crossing is the busiest land crossing in the world. So at least 70,000 cars cross each day, along with 20,000 pedestrians each day. So as you can see, the interaction that we have, between Baja California and California is very, very intertwined. So starting from there, now this context is perfect for this type of back and forth. So starting from there, the return migration that we have, or these retorno students that we have, are very particular because they're different in a sense that they have dual nationalities. Yes, and this legal status makes them a little bit different. So that means that they have different options. And one of those options, from a cultural, from an academic, from a social, and even, other types of interactions that we have.
Personal, I believe, no? Personal.
Exactly. Are very different. So they decided to come back to study in our BA program in language teaching and translation. So that's why my cuerpo académico, is interested in this type of phenomenon, which has to do with applied linguistics to border studies.
Oh, very interesting. So I believe even the needs or personal needs of these students are very different. And I was thinking that obviously the way they think, the way they process the information, the way they understand life in general, the culture they have, because they have, I believe they have culture aspects of both cultures.
Yes.
So that makes the students different in many aspects, right?
Yes.
First of all, they don't go to learn the language because they already know English probably better than Spanish, right?
Yes, but that's the particular that those are well, that you mentioned it, that is one of the particular aspects that we discovered, that even though they do have a very good grasp of
Mhm.
English in this case,
Okay.
um, their Spanish is lacking a lot of,
Okay.
they do not have the linguistic competence that you would think, even though these retorno students did speak Spanish in their homes when they were living in the United States. So when they returned to Mexico, their Spanish was not that well. Yes, so that's where the conflict started, because they were taking many courses in Spanish and in English. So, those are some of the things that we were not prepared, for as a university context. How
Okay.
could we help these students? And the same thing goes to the United States. Yes. So
I
I think
know.
that, we need more interaction on both sides of the border, because we're just looking at it from one side, not two sides.
I know. Okay. So one side from the perspective of Mexico, more
Yeah.
than from the perspective of the US, I believe.
Yes.
So
Yes.
what are those things that you have been modifying or adapting to this situation?
Unfortunately, not that much. That's the problem. Those are some of the things that, we've been trying to detect, and we also reached out to the University of San Diego State University. I have a colleague there, and he's very interested in he's a rhetorician, so he's writing. His
Okay.
area of expertise is writing, but in terms of writing, we're not doing that much. So we're just basically focusing, for example, on a 5-paragraph essay, and that's it. So I think that as a university context, having to deal with these students, which are basically invisible, because the Faculty of Languages is not the only faculty that receives these students. We have, for example, marine science.
Mhm.
We have the exact sciences that have a lot of influx of these types of students. So, but they're basically invisible. They're basically invisible to the university.
So so some of the problems or the main problems, let's call it problems, that they face or they face and you face too, is this aspect of writing only,
Yeah,
mainly.
writing, and for example, morphology, which we teach at the beginning, like the first and second semester. We teach morphology, so they're discovering, the language in itself. I
Mhm.
mean, it's very different, for them to acquire the language, and is totally different. It's a different, process, cognitively speaking, from to learn a language. So those are some of the things that we're discovering, along with, they for them, family is very important, so they're coming back with their families. The high cost of living, California is very expensive. Baja California is as well, but
No.
California is very expensive. So, for them to attend the university is, wow, it's, I mean, not really a tangible experience for them.
So how does this lack of competence in their would we say that it's a mother tongue, the Spanish, or not?
Yes.
It's the mother tongue. Okay,
Yes.
so
Mhm.
how does this lack of mother tongue affects their learning or the other competences in terms of learning and you know
Yeah. Uh-huh.
school in general?
Yes, cool. Yeah, and it's very interesting because it does, I mean, the aspect of identity, right? They're going to be there. This study was focused on 9 retorno students. 8 are girls, and 1 is a young man, and they're interested. They both belong to language teaching and translation studies. So that really does, in a sense, kind of like make them aware, very aware, that their lack of knowledge in their L1 is very tangible, and it does affect, to a certain sense, their identity as future professionals. So they understand that they need to have that grasp of both languages in order for them to be, successful language teachers or, translators or interpreters. So that does affect, they're very aware that they're lacking this linguistic competence in Spanish or, in English. And the students that were living in California, which were basically all of them, they felt that the bilingual English programs in the United States did not really help them. Either develop Spanish on one hand, and the English was kind of like stuck right in between. So it was really kind of interesting to see that something that is very, very tangible for them.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing. Some of the things that you mentioned in the abstract you sent was about the social impact of all these. How can we? What can you say about it? What can you say about this social impact?
Yes, they basically said and shared in the interview was that they felt a sense of or a sort of discrimination going back, and they were sometimes called pochos. They were called, they felt that they didn't belong here and that they didn't belong there. So that for them was something that was like a bit of a culture shock. Yes, for them, to come back after so many years, their formative years in the United States. So coming back was a culture shock, as well as being discriminated in school for, being pocho, or, sounding weird, as they said in Spanish, having this, particular accent. So socially for them, that was a bit of a shock. And they said that they they would definitely do something else. And on the other side of the border, this was them coming back to Mexico, but when they go back and forth to the United States, they feel uneasy. They really don't like living in the United States.
Okay.
Now that they came back to Mexico. So that was really kind of like an extreme, like two sides of the continuum, right? Two extreme poles.
In terms, you already mentioned that some of the reasons why they came back to Mexico was the cost of life.
Yes.
And what are other reasons why they decided to come back to Mexico and study in a Mexican university?
Yes, for them it was the first reason that was very important for them was family. Much of the literature that has to do with return migration deals with the person that is going to the United States is usually alone. That has changed. That has shifted, and now people that are migrating are taking their family with them. So for them, it's like this common unit, this family moving back and forth, and that is one of the main reasons their family came back. So they decided to come back. Another one, the second reason was the one that I just mentioned. The cost of living is very expensive in California. And the third reason was that they felt uneasy living in the United States. Some were, basically in terms of living conditions, some were basically, like stuck in the same house, and many people were sharing that same house. So for them, it's very expensive. So coming back to Mexico was a very feasible option.
So when you say that they travel with family, I'm thinking about young students, young adults, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you say they bring their family with them, you mean the mother, father, all the family?
Yes.
Because they were originally from Ensenada, or not necessarily?
Yes, they were originally from Ensenada. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very interesting. Yes, and apart from having this dual nationality, that's a very interesting, characteristic, because it's very different from other types of migration. That is, further south in Mexico, as you mentioned at the beginning, we're very different, and usually they either go back because they were either deported or induced by some sense, and this type of return migration that we have on the border region is this dual, going back and forth. For example, people in Tijuana, they go to school. I mean, they just cross, go to school, and then come back to their house in the afternoon. So that's a very common trait, a very common characteristic of this type of border living and border region. Very particular.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was going to mention, because it's very common that people from Tijuana goes to San Diego, or basically San Diego, and it's like more like obviously it's much more convenient for them, because obviously they want to study in San Diego in the United States, or in a school or university, which is like more it's more convenient for them, right?
Yes.
But this idea of coming back to Mexico, it's the other way around, right?
Yeah.
So what benefits do they have from studying in Mexico? What can they get in return?
Okay. Yeah. What they get in return is they can go back to the United States and be a college graduate. Yes, for them, that was like the main, one of the main issues, because their parents were very, very worried that they were not going to obtain a college education in the United States because of the high cost of tuition and living there, basically. So they decided to come back to the university. They come to university context, and when they're finished, for them it's an option because they have that dual nationality. So they go back. They have some. California has a program where they like an equivalence, and they have their teacher qualifications. Each state in the United States, as I understand, has their own like teaching qualifications. So they have like a different types of examination and board examinations, and then they have that option. So for them, it's something that is wonderful. Go to Mexico, study, go to college there, and then go back to the United States and be a professional.
Interesting. Is it complicated to have this examination? I mean, or to get this you mentioned something that it's not examination, but before the examination they
they're like board, there's certifications. Each teacher each state in the United States, as I know, has their own board examinations, and you can be a teacher in California.
Okay, interesting.
You can be a teacher, even though you studied in Mexico, you can be a teacher.
So I believe probably all of them, most of them, it's what they do, right? They go and get these examinations.
Yes,
they have a college degree, and then they go back to the States. And
yes. And for example, our translators and interpreters, for them it's very easy in that sense, because they basically can work freelance. So many of the translators, they're working freelance or working across the border, and in many, like for example, embassies. We have a lot of the students that are working in the embassies, the Mexican embassy, their U.S. embassy, and then we have the interpreters that work freelance as well, but they're basically doing other things related to interpreting on both sides of the border. It's very interesting.
I believe so. So speaking of or hearing the voices of these participants and their identities, what else did you discover from these interviews you conducted?
Okay, the reasons, the two research questions were, basically what are these reasons that they're coming back to Mexico, and then the second one was how their viewing, or what are their perceptions in terms of language learning, because they're learning, like relearning the language, their L1 specifically, and how this is impacting their future professional identities. So one of the main reasons that I mentioned a while ago was that, they're aware that they're lacking their L1, and they need, to perfect, they need to develop more, their linguistic competence in that sense, in order to become successful either interpreters or language teachers. And also that they have that, option, as I mentioned before, to go back and forth. They go back and forth, and that we know that as universities on both sides of the border, we have a lot to do. We need to reach out to each other more. We need more interaction. We need more research. We need more compatibility in terms of, programs, understanding the Mexican educational system as well as the United States educational system. And those are some of the things that we're lacking. And if you think, we're so close to the border, but we're still like far away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Because of the things we're not doing.
Okay. Yes, it's it seems that it seems that the countries are very close, but at the same time they're very far, right?
Exactly.
In many senses.
Yes.
Geographically, they are very close, but in other things, they are totally opposite.
Yes.
So, have you noticed that these phenomena of return students has increased in let's say, the last few years, the last 5, 10, or has it been occurring forever, or?
Yeah. According to the Pew Research Center, it has gone up in the last decade. It has gone up in the last decade, and it's very interesting, because I think that we should, rethink or maybe reevaluate the terminology that we're using for these types of students, which are very different. They have different characteristics from, the other returnees that are coming back to the country. So I think that as a border state, we should rethink about this terminology and how we're viewing them, how we can, reach out to the other side of the border and, ask for help. We need to understand what you're dealing with when these students go to your country, and vice versa. So I think those are some of the things that we should pay attention to, because it is going up. It is going up. And, we should really understand that as a university, we need to deal with these issues. And, if you're thinking about an internationalization process from within the university, you need to think about these things. Dual programs. I don't know if you have dual programs.
So, because more than an international policy is a reality, and you are dealing with Mexican people, they are not, right? They're not Americans coming to Mexico. They are Mexicans returning to Mexico.
Yes.
Even though they're Mexican, well, the reality is totally different, as you just mentioned.
Yes.
So I was thinking that maybe from these growing up of change of the phenomenon and growing up in the numbers, have you like some sort of visualize like options or opportunities in terms of, for example, the creations of new programs, not only in terms of teachings or translation, but also in the sense, maybe, I don't know, other kinds of programs different from the one you already have, or maybe different areas of study?
Yeah, we have thought about it, especially, with this, like, this process that we just went through, being independent and having more autonomy in terms of our programs. But one thing is like a crude reality on our border region, is that we need to think about these students in a sense that we need to reevaluate our programs. especially like keeping our program up to date with these international policies in terms of language, being a language center. We need to think about that and reevaluate what our students are, actually, needing in terms of, languages. And I think that, thinking about internationalization, we should be able to offer students from the other side of the border, to come and study or have, more. We have not been able to actually sit down and think about, thinking of a dual language program. And it's ridiculous because we're so close to the border. I mean, it's something that you would probably automatically think it's happening, but it's not. And we have a lot to do, and they have not been able to, concretely sit down and think about these things and talk about them. And that's something that we should do as a border state.
So what are those new areas of study or programs that perhaps you visualize, not very close, but maybe like it would be a good idea to, so what are those things that you might probably talk to your colleagues or dreamed about?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that, Ensenada, well, you've been to Ensenada, so it's very particular because it's one of those few cities that has a lot of these research centers like UNAM, CICESE, the same, UABC. Yes, it's very multicultural in a sense. We also have in the southern part of Ensenada, we have, the wine region. So we have a lot of people from different parts of the world. So in that sense, it is very multicultural. Very multicultural. So we have not just English, we have, French, we have Russian, we have a lot of winemakers that are Russian. And we also have in the southern part of Ensenada as well, we have a lot of indigenous languages. Yes. So that becomes a very rich context for, sociologists and, linguists alike to be, interested in researching, the different phenomena that are occurring in one same place. So I think I'm, going back to that question, I think that it has to do with that phenomenon and being multicultural and thinking about, a program that deals with these particularities, in terms of, learning a language, in terms of culture, in terms of, just being able to interact in different languages. It's interesting.
I know it's another country.
It's another country, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So I was thinking about the bureaucratic system, because being a state university, you belong to obviously you are autonomous, but you still belong to the SEP, no? In many senses, you belong to being a state university. You belong to the state of Mexico, and obviously we have our own way of doing things in terms of bureaucracy and administrative system, and obviously in the United States, they have a very different way of doing things, or at least different. So how do they deal with, talking about the students, how do they deal with these issue of facing new forms of administration and new forms of processing things, because every time people that come from the United States, they mention that things in Mexico go very slowly,
Yes.
So how do they deal with this issue?
Yeah, and that's a very good question because I think, being in or on the border region, maybe I could dare say facilitates things. It's not so bureaucratic. It's not so bureaucratic, and within and in terms of the set, but within the university, It is very easygoing. There is, in a sense, a lot of support from, like the student offices, and there is a lot of information constantly. In terms of maybe like the revalidation process, those things that they have to deal with once they arrive, to the university context. And in that sense, I think that it's helpful. There is a lot of support, I would say, from the university, and it's not so bureaucratic.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Good. And what about this, for example, the way they, I believe their families support them, and they find it very easily, or they find it much more easy to live in Ensenada than live in the United States.
Yes.
So in terms of the cost of living, and how do they get support from their family?
Yeah, their family, and I know some of them like work part-time. Some work part-time. Others have that support from their family. And obviously, university tuition is very, inexpensive. It's not, cost efficient. It is cost efficient for these students, but they basically have a lot of support from their family.
Another question or another thing that came to my mind was about the fact that once they learn Spanish better, or academically, I believe their Spanish progress, right? Once they go to Ensenada and study there,
Yeah.
they become more competent in Spanish.
Yeah, and they feel more comfortable. They feel more comfortable, learning Spanish and being, totally immersed in their L1. And they see it as, that it depends on their success, obviously, having that grasp of both languages. And at the end of the day, they're going to be either, language teachers, and they're going to need to be, competent professionally speaking. And another thing that is very particular that I might add is that, for example, they since they do not have an accent, quotation mark, they do not have an accent, for them to get a good job is very easy, because of that, that background, that linguistic, background, not having an accent, being fluent in English. And, they get jobs fairly easily. But what they did mention was that they had friends in other parts of Mexico that were also language teachers, and that they did not have that linguistic competence to a certain level, but and they had an accent, and they were not hired because of that Mexican accent. That was very interesting that they mentioned in the interviews. So for it's like for them it's easy because they go back and forth, they have dual nationalities, and they speak very well.
So that is probably because those friends that they mentioned live more time in Mexico than the United States. Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if that happens in Colima. I was in Guanajuato a while ago, and one of the seminars that I went to was basically focusing around that they were not hired because of their accent.
Wow. Well, yeah. That's what, as we say, that's harina de otro costal, right?
I know.
Because
exactly.
Well, that's probably we can talk about that on another, because that's probably related to, I don't know, to another area. But
it's interesting.
It's interesting, yes, to point it out.
Yes.
So I was thinking about this idea of probably they use more, well, depending on the job or depending on the activities they do, they probably use more Spanish than English. Could that be could that be one of the situations they face? I mean, using more Spanish in their jobs than English, or probably being a Spanish teacher?
Yeah, maybe. Even though they do feel comfortable. One of the girls said that they do feel comfortable in both languages, both cultures. Yes, but obviously there is there is like a certain inclination to one of the languages. And in this case, it was English because they still have that background and that interaction with friends from the United States. Or, they're going back and forth, to see like friends in California, and they come back and they have, their friends there. So they have like a certain inclination to one language over the other, even though they're both comfortable in, two cultures. It's very interesting to see that, they're comfortable.
Well, it's almost an hour, and we've spoken about very, very little things. So tell me more about what are you studying now? What are you investigating now? In everything related to this topic, or are you doing something different? Or
I'm very interested. I still have one article that I'm working on right now, and that is something that still has to do with this topic, but in terms of internationalization, and it's something that we presented, my colleague and I, in Chicago last year, in the Rhetorics conference, and I'm working on that right now. So hopefully it will be published soon, in terms of these students and how the university, well, I would say, is still not contemplating or actually doing something in order to promote this internationalization process. So I'm working.
It is not, or it is
No,
not so much.
It's still, there are many things up in the air, I would say.
How come being so international in terms of the context where you are? So
good question. That's a very good question.
Obviously, it's just a question that I'm just asking, but so are there any particular reasons, or?
I mean, I don't know what the reasons are, because they are. I think it's a little bit unfair for me to say that they're not doing nothing.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, they're working a lot on teachers, for example, researchers, to interact more with other peers from other parts of the world. So there is this, for example, a COIL. I don't know if you're familiar with that, collaborative online integrated learning. So they're like promoting that. There was like a while, like a year or 2 years ago, they were promoting that very much, in that sense. And then there are also a lot of different faculties that are integrating, for example, CLIL. So we are, the language faculty started working on, teaching and collaborating with these teachers from different fields, so they can teach their subjects, they can teach their, contents in English. So, they're doing that, but I think that there's still much more to be done in that sense, because for example, in the COIL project, I participated and my students were very shy in terms of participating with other students from California, for example. So I think that's something that we observed, and in that sense, we need to maybe give like some sort of crash course in for students in terms of, this is a type of interaction or academic interaction that needs to be carried out when you are interacting with these students. So I think that those are some problem areas that we detected, and it's part of a process. A process takes time. So those are some of the things that they're doing, but we need to do more in that sense.
No, that's what I was going to say, that it's probably not you're doing, but not how would you would like to do it, right?
Exactly.
More than what you're doing now.
Yes.
So you went to you're right now you're working on a paper on this topic.
Yes, on this topic. And I'm also interested in working with women's studies.
Okay.
So, yeah, women's studies. Yeah, women in applied linguistics, for example, or language teaching. So I'm interested in that area right now.
So,
So.
well, tell me more about that because we need to know more about women's participation in science. You know,
Yeah, I think that I don't know in Colima, but we are a lot. We have a lot of women researchers, especially in the exact studies. So we have a lot of women scientists, and they're doing a lot of work in terms of disseminating what they're doing and trying to make visible you know. The aspect of women being in
both
immersed
in
in science and women being immersed in other areas. So that's something that interests me, and see how that goes with women's studies and applied linguistics, for example, or language teaching.
okay, interesting. Yes, I
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Yes, I think it's everywhere.
Yes,
This
exactly.
idea of finding out what women are doing, how they are doing, how do they get involved, and so on. Well,
Yes, yes.
very interesting. Well, if you would like to uh, participants or voices from Colima, you know that you can contact.
Perfect. Yes, sounds wonderful. I'm sure the voices in Colima are going to be very interesting.
Yes. Well, so I don't know if you would like to say something else about, anything you would like. We have
Hmm.
um, a few students listening,
Hmm.
and
I wonder where mine are.
the good thing about this is that we are also posting this conversation through Facebook,
Hmm.
via Facebook. So the video will be there.
Hmm.
More and more people will join later or watch the video and listen to the video. I'm
Hmm.
sure about that because this happened
Hmm.
in other occasions. So this is the last year. Yes, last year we had 5 of these talks with people basically from Colima, but now we have I have organized these talks with people from other parts of from academics from other universities outside of Colima, obviously.
Wonderful.
And well, you are the second. We had a last month. We had a chat with one professor from Colombia. So
Mhm.
we're going international.
Very good. And it's a wonderful initiative because I think that we need to reach other contexts.
Audience,
Yes, and have a different
researchers,
audience because sometimes we're immersed in our in our own research, and very technical, very uh,
exactly.
very specific terminology. But sometimes we really need to have that like that impact in other parts of the community.
So since one of the target, let's say it like that, of these talks is students from the School of Foreign Languages, but from other schools as well. I would like to say or to say something to students in regards to uh, being a teacher and being a translator, because I know that you have this licenciatura of traducción y interpretación. So what could you, with your experience and with all your knowledge, um, what could you say to students who are part of the licenciatura en enseñanza de lenguas, the University of Colima?
Yeah, I think that whatever you're interested in, either language or translation, that you should always um, think about and be very, very insightful in terms of what is happening in your field. I think that as teachers, sometimes we, or everybody in their field, gets so immersed in whatever it is that they're doing that sometimes they kind of lose track of what's actually going on in that field. So always trying to pinpoint what the tendencies are, regarding teaching, regarding, translation studies, medicine, whatever. And, just be insightful, try to keep track of those things that are happening, and never lose sight of your context, because wonderful things happen in your context. And a lot of research takes place in your context. So I think that we have a voice, and I think that we should always be able to share it and have, different insights with other types of contexts. And I think that's what makes, research so rich, in terms of detecting what's happening, what's not happening, etc. So I think that those are the two things that I always tell my students.
Okay, interesting. Well, I'm going to open the open the chat. Well, it's already open, but I'm gonna invite people from the audience to send any question. Anybody would like to participate, and we have the chat. We have, there is a chat in Zoom, so if anybody would like to throw a question to our guest, please.
Yes, they're very welcome.
Tatiana can answer almost any questions, but
I don't know, almost
personal ones. Almost any, I said, but personal ones. So if anyone from the audience would like to say something, would like to ask a question to Tatiana, thank you very much, Tatiana, for accepting the invitation. It's I would like to say that Tatiana always answers my messages.
Likewise.
Yes, and she always is there when I ask her for participate in any initiative that the School of Foreign Languages has through me. Yes. So thank you very much for your kindness and for being.
No, thank you for your warm invitation, and it's always a delight. We have been friends for quite a while. We did our PhD together, and we have been. He's a very warm and kind friend. So yeah, it's always a pleasure to see him.
Thank you very much. Okay, if seems that we don't have any questions.
Okay.
Maybe later. Okay, yes, congratulations, Carmen. This is a very interesting talk. What about the students' exchange in the border? Is it common? Thank you, Carmen. This is a very interesting question.
Yeah. Thank you, Carmen. Yes, it is and this is very particular because there, especially UABC, we have a lot of, I'm sure within your university, you have a department that deals with exchange, student exchanges. UABC has a department focused specifically on that. There are a lot of exchange programs, but it's very interesting that not to the United States.
Okay.
Yes, they go to other places. France is a very common, destination for an exchange program. Italy as well, sometimes Japan, but very few go to English-speaking countries. It's something that I'm like totally blown away. Yes.
Well, that's another area of research.
Yes, but it is going back to your question, Carmen. Yes, it is common. It is common.
Okay, thank you, Carmen. Thank you. Interesting. Any other question? No more questions. Okay, well, I think we have something to. Let me see.
Yeah, Carmen. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is. Yeah. Thank you, Carmen. The reasons that, because they already have the language, but I think that, from a language teaching perspective, I think that being able to, go and travel abroad, especially, for example, to England or to the United States, I think it, develops and consolidates, their linguistic competence even more. Mm-hmm. But they rarely travel to, English speaking countries, even though they do have the language. And we're talking about maybe a C1, B2, C1 at the most. And I think that for language teachers, you should have a higher level of expertise.
Okay. I think probably, I don't, just thinking, probably has to be with the culture too. Huh? It's because sometimes you travel to other places because of the country, not only because of the language.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Probably you are trying to learn different things from, not only from the language, but the country of the culture of the country where you travel.
Yeah, and maybe as Carmen said, it is like for Baja Californians, yes, it is, it's like, oh yeah, let's go to San Diego. Oh yeah,
okay, yes.
It's very common.
Very
it's
common.
Like very common. So maybe that's one of, another reason that they're not really interested in the United States. They automatically think that all the states in the United States are like California, and well, they're not. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
No, you're welcome, Carmen.
So in behalf of the School of Foreign Languages, en la Universidad de Colima, otorga esta constancia a la doctora Tatiana Galván de la Fuente por impartir la conferencia, la charla, Language Learning and Identity of Retorno Students in a BA program, a Border University Study, en el marco de la segunda temporada de Permanent Talks y llevada a cabo en la modalidad virtual el jueves 21 de marzo del 2024. Atentamente, Estudia, Lucha y Trabaja, Villa de Álvarez, Colima, México, 21 de marzo. Y lo firmó la directora del plantel, que aquí la tenemos también presente. Gracias, directora, por estar aquí con nosotros.
Muchas gracias, maestra.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll send it to you right away.
No worries. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for the invitation, and it's been a pleasure talking to your students and all the colleagues here present.
Muchas gracias, Tatiana. Seguimos en contacto, seguimos trabajando juntos, ¿verdad?
Claro que sí.
Ahí vamos a estar pues en contacto.
Hay muchos proyectos, hay cosas y muchas colaboraciones. Muchas gracias.
Gracias y muy amable por tu...
Muchas gracias por la invitación. Muchísimas gracias y estamos en contacto.
El video